Okay. This one is peak. This guy gets stuck inside the game he used to hack, and his phone comes with him, still loaded with the game's decompiled code. This means he can edit any value of the game he chooses. By the end of this story, he hooks the loot system itself. Every reward in the world pays him double, then double again. You'll see him freeze a raid boss mid-swing. You'll see him crash an economy built on 1% drop rates. And the crazy part? Every hack in this story is real. This is genuinely how simple games get cracked with cheat engine, value scans, memory hooks, all of it. One quick note before we start: don't do this in games you don't own. Do it in games he owns. He owns this one, personally. Okay, story starts now. 2 minutes before any of this, Milo was in his bedroom cracking the same game he cracked for fun for 3 years. Cheat engine open on one monitor, the game on the other. His cracked cyan phone glowing on the desk beside the keyboard. He found the drop rate table, grabbed the little 1%, and dragged it up to 100. He grinned. Easy, too easy. The whole monitor flooded red, anti-cheat violation, in letters as tall as his hand. The screen went white and reached out of the glass for him. It spat him out face down in wet grass, hoodie and all, the phone still warm in his fist. Cold water soaked through his jeans. Real dirt was under his nails. He shoved up onto his hands and saw flat green running to the edge of the world. He knew this field. The starter meadow, the one he'd stared at from 100 loading screens, except the wind was real now. He didn't get to feel relieved. The grass was already moving. Low, heavy, fast, a wake cutting straight at him like a shark under a lawn. It broke cover, a starter zone beast, all horns and gray hide, and it lunged. Milo threw himself sideways. It crashed through the spot where he'd knelt, close enough that its hot breath fogged his arm. Then it wheeled around for another pass. Weak, on paper. Deadly to a man with 0 levels and a stick for a spine. He had no sword. He had one tool he'd ever been good with. His thumb was already on the glass. Old habit, 3 years deep. The phone beeped in his hand. A little glowing shape unfolded off the cracked screen and hung in the air beside him, the game's own assistant, apparently along for the ride. TECH2 port. Hi. I'm tech support. I came with the phone. TET2 port. I'll break down how these hacks actually work, cause he does them fast. The beast dug in and charged. Tech support. Here's the whole trick. The game keeps every value as a plain number, hidden in memory somewhere. Tech support. He doesn't know which one, so he grabs them all, waits for one to change, and throws away everything that didn't. Do that a few times and one number is left. The avatar jabbed a tiny finger at the charging beast. TECHU port, and he's about to do that, too, that. Milo couldn't scan the beast's health, he didn't know the number. But its distance to him was a number too, and it only went one way while the thing charged, down. A number that shrinks every second something gets closer. That, he could hunt. First scan, grab everything. Every number in the whole world, whatever its value. The phone showed a count, 4,096,201 results. The beast closed 10 paces. Its distance number just got smaller, so Milo scanned again, keep only the numbers that DEC raised since last time. Throw out everything else. The count crashed to 12. The beast reared for the kill. He let it come. Every step closer dropped the real number again, and everything that wasn't still falling got cut. Decreased, he breathed. 12 became 1. A single highlighted value, alone on the glass. The only number in the whole world that went down every single time the beast got closer. Its distance. The real one. Its horns a foot from his face. Milo set that number to 99,000. The beast was caked backward, ripped off its feet, and flung a whole field away. It skidded to a stop in the far grass, tiny now, shaking its head. The game didn't care, it was mid-kill. Distance is distance, it just obeyed. Milo sat there in the grass, heart slamming, hands shaking, very much not dead. 3 years he'd done this behind glass, safe, a game he could quit. Now the same old trick had saved his real skin. 4 million, he said out loud. 12. 1. That's when he heard the gasp. A wiry kid stood frozen at the field's edge, a patched mustard-yellow porter's smock hanging off his shoulders. A slate tallyboard was slung on his back, a chalk nub swinging on a string at his belt. Copper-red hair, warm hazel eyes gone wide. Tibbs. A drop counter by trade, the world's unluckiest role. And he'd seen the whole thing. The board on his back was covered edge to edge in old chalk marks, hundreds of them, a lifetime of counting other people's luck. Tibbs looked at the beast a field away, then at the nobody in starter cloth who'd put it there. His chalk was already moving. He scratched one hard mark onto the board. 1, he whispered, like it was holy. 9 years I've counted this field. Nothing walks through a gorehide. You just counted it to death. First mark on the board. First person in this world to say Milo's win out loud. Milo, he said, because the kid clearly needed a name to write. It's Milo. Tibbs wrote it above the mark, handshaking, and looked back up like Milo might vanish. Milo stared at the distance value still glowing on his phone. If it worked on the beast, it worked on him. Off on a far hill sat a little shop, a porter's supply post, a good 100 paces away. He found his own distance to that shop door, one number, live on the glass. He took a single step, and as his foot came down, he drove the number to 0. The world blinked. He was standing at the shop door, 100 paces, gone. A field back, Tibbs spun in a full circle, mouth open, looking for a man who wasn't there anymore. A toast popped on the phone, a star, and the words, teleport hack, unlocked. Over here, Milo called across the field, and Tibbs nearly fell over finding him. The kid sprinted the 100 paces, boots flopping, and scratched a wild third mark on his board before he'd even stopped. That's not walking, he gasped, that's just being somewhere else. TEC poor T, note for later, memory doesn't know what anything is. TECS poor T, a health bar and a distance look exactly the same to it, just numbers. That blind spot nearly gets him killed. But not yet. Tibbs jogged up panting, staring at the shop, then at Milo, then at the board in his hands. That's when the path went dark with bodies. A whole pack of mobs rose out of the grass across the only gap out of the meadow, low, ugly things, too many legs spread wall to wall. That's the way home, Tibbs breathed. There's no path around it. There's always a path, Milo said and lifted the phone. He didn't need to fight them. He needed the number that decided how close he could get before they woke. Agra radius. Every mob carried one, hidden. Read it, and he could walk the exact line where none of them ever saw him. But he couldn't type a distance he didn't know, so he did it the honest way. He picked one mob and took a single step toward it, poking it, on purpose, to make its wake value flip. The mob's head snapped up. One value in the whole field jumped from asleep to awake. Changed, Milo said, and scanned on it. The list crashed. He stepped back a pace and the value flipped again, awake to asleep. Scan. A handful left, 2 more steps, 2 more flips, 2 more scans, and the phone held up a single address, the wake distance itself ticking live as he moved. 2 paces. That was the whole secret. Closer than 2 paces to any of them, and it woke. Stay outside 2, and he was furniture. He pulled that pattern across the entire pack, every mob's ring the same, and then he did the thing that made Tibbs stop breathing. He rendered the rings into his own eyes. Glowing circles bloomed on the grass around every mob, drawn in cyan light only he could see, and the one thin, clear scene that threaded between them all. At the field's edge, a knot of commoners had gathered. Porters, a farmer, an old woman with a basket, come to watch the pack that walled them all in. Stay on my heels, Milo told Tibbs. Exactly, don't drift. He walked into the pack, right between them. A mob's flank an arm's length off his shoulder, its dull eye pointed straight at him, and it didn't so much as blink. He stepped where the glowing seam bent, curved where it curved, hands in his hoodie pockets the whole way. He threaded the whole snarling dozen like a man crossing a quiet street. The commoners at the edge went dead silent, a nobody in starter cloth strolling through a death zone, untouched. One of the mobs swung its ugly head and stopped it, a hair short, still blind to the man 2 paces off. Milo and Tibbs came out the far side. The pack settled back into the grass behind them, none the wiser. Not one of them had turned its head. The old woman dropped her basket. A porter made a sign over his chest. Nothing even looked at you, Tibbs said, voice cracking. 2 paces, Milo said. They can't see past 2, so I stayed at 3. Tibbs scratched a second mark on the board and stared at it like the number scared him. The crowd didn't scatter. They edged closer, whispering, watching the starter cloth nobody the way you watch weather. Then Tibbs said the strange thing. You should see this place at night. Milo glanced at the locked pale dawn overhead. There is no night, the sky's stuck. That's the joke, Tibbs said, and pointed out at the empty green. Old legend. They say the rare loot, the good stuff, only drops here after dark. Full moon, glittering rolls, treasure in the grass. But the sky never turns, it's dawn forever, so nobody ever sees it. He kicked at the dirt. The green's the most boring field there is. Everybody leaves, it's just me and the dawn. He waved a hand at the wide, empty grass. Not another soul on it, all the way to the horizon. Milo looked up at the dead, pale sky. Night, he said slowly, is just a value. He opened a scan. But there was no number to type this time. He couldn't scan for night. So he told the phone to grab everything, blind. A snapshot of the whole field, held in memory, waiting. Now I need it to change, he said. And I can't move the sun, so I wait. For a long moment, nothing narrowed. The list sat huge and useless. Tibbs shifted, confused, watching him whisper at a slab of glass. Then the locked dawn flickered. One faint hitch of light at the horizon, the cycle straining against its own lock. One address moved. There, Milo breathed and filtered on it. Thousands of dead values fell away. One switch was left, alone on the glass, reading 0. Watch the sky, he told Tibbs, not the phone. He flipped the value, 0 to 1, one tap of his thumb, the world went white for half a heartbeat. Then night slammed down over the green. The pale dawn ripped away, and up came a full silver moon, a sky thick with stars, the whole meadow drowned in cool blue light. The commoners at the field edge cried out and pointed at a sky that had never once moved in living memory, and the legend was true. Rare spawns shimmered up out of the dark grass. Drops glittered everywhere, black boxes forming and popping open in the moonlight. Tibbs fell to his knees. A legendary drop unfolded right in front of him, his first ever, after 9 years and a lifetime of unlucky rolls. Another landed at Milo's feet, loot for the only 2 people left standing in the whole empty field. The unluckiest kid alive, cradling a legendary, the drop 9 years of counting had never once given him. Tibbs held his glowing prize in both hands, near tears. He turned to sky, he whispered, with his 2SI thumb. He couldn't even find a number for it. He just cut a mark all its own on the board and stared up at the impossible moon. Then, a few paces off, the air itself shivered. A chest shimmered into existence in the moonlit grass, big, banded, glowing gold at the seams, legendary. Tibbs pointed with a shaking hand. That's a night chest. I've heard of them. Nobody I know has ever seen one. Milo walked up to it, but he didn't open it. Tibbs reached for the lid on reflex. Milo caught his wrist. Wait, watch this. He read the chest instead, pulled its address off the glowing gold seams, and traced back to the routine that would fill it the second it opened. Tech support. New trick. Last lesson for now, hooking. Tech support. You attach your own code onto one of the game's routines, so every time it runs your rule too. Milo found the reward-filled routine, read what it did, and spliced one line in front of its answer, pay it twice. Then he opened the chest. Gold light poured out. Not one legendary. 2 side by side in the grass, twins. On the chest's own face a little counter ticked, ×2. The reward the game meant to give, run through Milo's rule, and paid out double. Tibbs's chalk snapped clean in half in his fingers. He didn't even reach for another piece, he just stared at the 2 legendaries, then at Milo, then at the number floating over the chest. 2, he managed. It doubled. Milo looked at the pair of legendaries, and the hook still sitting live and quiet inside the game's own guts. If one routine doubles, he said, what about all of them? He crouched by the little fire Tibbs had going, took one slow breath, and turned the phone over in his hand. 3 things my phone can touch, he said. The sky? He nodded up at the moon he'd made. Done, that was the warm-up. The drops. He flicked one of the twin legendaries. Just started, and here's the part that matters, the hook stacks. 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 100. And the third. His voice cooled. The anticheat. The thing that watches. It purges anyone who touches memory the way I just did, wipes them out. He turned the phone in his hand. But it only watches players. Whatever the game does to itself, it trusts completely. He nodded at the moon, at the twin legendaries, at the seam still faintly glowing in his eyes. So I don't beat the anti-cheat. I get it to think I'm the game. Tibbs looked up from the board, chalk dust on his cheeks. And you're going to make it trust YOU. Milo almost smiled. He looked past the fire, out to where the land got rich, and there, in the last of the night, he saw the fences, high ones, manned, a whole guild's wall thrown up around every field worth farming. Behind the fences the mobs were fat and the rolls were rich, the rare drops worth crashing whole markets over. 4 legendaries in a starter meadow was a card trick. The real drops came from the good grounds, and the good grounds were walled. He turned the cyan phone once in his hand and looked at the wall. The good fields are walled. He needs in. There's a gap in the guild's wall where a cart rolls through, and I walked in behind the cart. Nobody stops a bag carrier. Tibbs had told me that much on the way, board bouncing on his back, and he was right. I kept my head down and my cyan phone against my leg, and the gatemen looked straight through me. Starter cloth is its own kind of invisible. Then I was in, and the fields opened up wide and green and rich, and I saw why men built a wall around them. The mobs here were fat, slow. Dying by the dozen under a party in white and gold, and every death dropped a black box that hung and cracked and paid. Loot everywhere. More rolls in 1 minute than the spawn field saw in a day. I got about 10 steps before the crown hunter noticed me. He came off the kill line like he owned the grass. Tall, gym perfect, platinum hair slicked flat, a white and gold coat and a crimson sash, and rare drops hung off him like a man wearing his own trophy case. He looked me over once, top to bottom, and his mouth did something amused. Starter cloth, he said. Cute. The bag rack's that way. Behind him 2 gatekeepers laughed on cue. Day 1 roll, one of them added. You should have quit at the spawn field. I said nothing. I've learned that saying nothing makes people fill the silence with more of themselves, and Wade did. No guild, no luck, no class. He ticked them off on gloved fingers, enjoying it. What are you even for? Tibbs had gone still beside me, board hugged to his chest. I watched Wade instead of answering. watched the way he stood in the middle of a rich field, like the ground had been deeded to him at birth. Because it had. That's the thing about a man like Wade, his whole life is one number he rolled the day he was born. A 1% drop rate, landed by luck, worn like it was earned. He never scanned a thing. He never hooked a thing. He got handed the good roll and spent the rest of his life standing on top of it, sneering down. He nodded at the phone in my hand, his crown line, the one that got the biggest laugh. Cute phone. Does it grind for you? More than you know, I thought. You're in a farm, Wade said, done with me now, turning back to his kills. So farm, stay out of the party's rolls. The scraps at the edge are all yours, bag boy. The scraps at the edge. The mobs nobody bothered with. The box is not worth a crown hunter's time. Fine. He'll take the scraps and hook them. I went to the edge where the small mobs died, and I got to work the only way I know how. A scrap chest sat cracked in the weeds, a low table of a thing, the game's cheapest reward box. I crouched. Tibbs crouched with me, chalk ready. I read the box the honest way first, thumb on the glass, address off the hanging cube, the count of loot inside sitting at a sad little 3. A faint ring flickered around the chest as I read it, a number hanging over it that only I could see. Then I traced back from the box to the thing that fed it. A different table, its own address, its own little chunk of code that decides what a scrap chest coughs up. Every reward is its own machine. Nothing carries for free. I found it on the phone. A list of candidates narrowing under my thumb, 49, 1. There it sat. I read what it did, pull the chest's number, hand it over, close the lid. Simple. Old games always are, so I hooked it. One line of mine spliced in front of its answer, whatever you were about to give, double it. But the night chest hook was still live too, from the night before. Both rules firing now, one stacked on the other. No master switch, no gift, 2 separate splices doing 2 separate jobs, their answers piling up. I nudged the scrap chest open with a knuckle. It overflowed. Loot came up out of it and spilled into the grass, way too much for a chest that cheap, tumbling out and out until the weeds were full of it. Tibbs's chalk froze. He counted on reflex, lips moving, and his voice climbed as the number got stupid. That's 4 times what a scrap chest gives. He looked at me, hazel eyes wide. Times 4. That's the third field that's paid you double, Milo. Night chest from before, that's your 1. This makes 3. His chalk hit the slate. A fat new mark, and beside it he scratched over the old X2, made it X4. Times 4. Times 4. 2 hooks, stacked, on a chest. Wade told me wasn't worth walking to. I looked back across the field, at the crown hunter working his rich kills for single rolls, and I almost felt bad. Almost. Across the grass, a big one dropped under Wade's blade. A fat mob, a fat box, the kind that pays a real drop. Wade wants that kill. He wanted it, and he took it. That's the other thing about men who never earned anything. They'll shove you off the little you've got just to prove the field is theirs. I'd walked up on a wounded mob at the edge, 1 blow from dead, my box as good as open. I had the phone up, thumb moving, reading the kill routine as it wound toward firing, and Wade came across the grass fast and put his shoulder into me. I went down in the weeds. The phone stayed in my hand. I've learned to fall around it. Wade landed the last hit on my mob, and the black box dropped for him, cracked for him, his by the game's own rules. Kills go to the strong, he said down at me, and struck the box, and it opened. 1 drop rolled out. He scooped it, held it up to the light like a jewel, and strutted off to show the party. But here's what Wade couldn't see. Down there in the grass with the glass an inch from my eye. I'd been reading that kill routine the whole time I was falling. Located it. Watched it. And it fires the second the box opens, not the second Wade's hand touches the loot. My hooks don't care whose name the game writes on the kill. They care about the routine, and the routine had already run. The reward rerouted. Doubled again, poured onto my tally, not his. Wade walked away with 1 drop in his fist. On Tibbs's board, a new mark ticked up. My count climbed, quiet, while the crown hunter held his single roll over his head like a trophy. He took the kill, Tibbs whispered, watching Wade's back. Then he looked at the number he'd just written and had to press his lips together to kill a laugh. He took the kill and got nothing. 1 drop. You got the rest. +1 to you, Milo, 0 to him. +1 to me. 0 to Wade, and he'd never know why his rich field felt so thin. I got up out of the weeds and dusted off the starter cloth. Don't hide it at the edge anymore, I decided. Do it in the open. Let the count speak. So I stopped sneaking. I walked to the middle of the good fields, where Wade's whole party farmed in their white and gold, and I started hooking every reward table I could find. Not 1 box. All of them. The kill routine, the chest table, a quest payout chunk I dug up under a bounty stone, each one its own find, its own inspect, its own splice. Thumb on glass, list narrowing, another rule going live. And every hook I laid stacked on all the ones before it. The field started paying me like a broken machine. Every mob that died anywhere near me dropped too much. Boxes overflowed before I touched them. Lou piled in the grass faster than Tibbs could chalk it, and he was chalking fast, board filling up, calling each win out loud because he couldn't help it. The party noticed the noise before they noticed me. One of them stopped swinging. Then another. Wade turned last, because men like Wade always assume the sound is for them. It wasn't. There were 2 piles on the grass by then. Theirs, a whole Apex Party's haul, a full day of the richest field in the land, gathered on a cloth. And mine, next to it. A nobody in starter cloth, one afternoon, no guild, no class. Mine was bigger, not close. Not almost. Bigger, plain to the eye, a heap against a handful, and every hunter in white and gold stood there and looked at the 2 piles side by side, and did the math their faces couldn't finish. The whole field went quiet. I stood in it. I didn't rush off, didn't cover it, didn't do the modest thing. I let them look. Let the crown hunter stare at a bag boy stack towering over his guild's best day, and let the quiet stretch until it hurt. Tibbs walked the length of my pile, counting, and his voice carried across the silent field because there was nothing else to hear. That's more than the party, he said. Louder. He turned in a slow circle so the whole field caught it. That's their whole day, everyone's, all of it together, and it's smaller. Nobody has a stack that big. Nobody has a stack that big. It rang out over the fields and every hunter there heard it, and none of them could argue with a pile they could see. Wade's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His ice blue eyes went from my heap to his, back and forth, and for the first time all day the man born on top of the world had no line ready. His whole life was one lucky number, and here was a nobody out counting it in the open, in front of everyone he'd ever sneered at. He went quiet. That was the payoff. Not a word, just Wade, silent, staring at proof he couldn't shove out of the way. Word like that travels to the market. The noise pulled someone off the field edge. An old man came shuffling over, stooped and slow, and he didn't look at the piles or the party. He looked at me. 50s. Thinning ash-brown hair, tired gray-green eyes, faded brick-red leathers cracked with 30 years of wear. A chipped pouch of cheap drops swung at his hip. He'd been out here at the quiet margin the whole time, the way I'd learned he always was. He watched me a long moment, and there was no wonder in it. Just something worn down and sad. You've got the touch, kid, I'll give you that. His voice was gravel and dust. I had a run once too, we all did. He nodded at my pile like it was a thing he'd already grieved. It doesn't last. 30 years I chased a 1% rate, never beat it. You know what I learned? He hitched the pouch. Quit, kid. The smart ones stop. Carry the bags, take the scraps, keep your head. Nobody up here lets a nobody win for long. Some part of me wanted to show him the phone. I didn't. He wouldn't have seen code. He'd have seen a man whispering at glass, same as Tibbs did, and Tibbs had followed me and this old man had already given up. Different men, same window, opposite ends. Thanks, I said, flat, and turned back to my pile. Water off. He was just another local, and locals are. Tibbs didn't turn away. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. The old man shuffled back toward the edge, and Tibbs watched him go the whole way, chalk still, bored, forgotten. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for and didn't want to. He was seeing a version of something. I looked away before I had to think about what. The party drifted off, muttering, and left us the field. I sat down in the grass with my stupid pile and my cyan phone, and Tibbs sat across from me and turned the tally board around so I could see the whole day of it. It was full. Marks crowded the slate edge to edge, and he'd started a running line down the side, adding as he went, and he read it back to me from the top like it mattered. Night chest, from before, that's your 1. His chalk touched each mark. The scrap chest, times 4. The kill Wade stole that paid you anyway. Every table in the middle. He tapped down the column, and the number at the bottom was a number no starter cloth nobody should own. All of it doubled, all of it stacked. Every field you touched today paid you double, Milo, every single one. He said my name again, careful, like it was part of the count. I put your name on all of it. My name on all of it. I looked at him writing it down, a real kid with ink on his fingers and a board on his back who'd chosen to follow the strange man whispering at glass, who counted my wins out loud when he could have kept his head down and stayed safe. And I heard the old man again. Nobody up here lets a nobody win for long. I'd told myself, the whole time I'd been here, that everyone in this world was code. NPCs. Numbers to read and routines to hook, nothing that could be lost. It made the work clean. Looking at Tibbs, it stopped being clean. Keep close to me, I said. From here on, not as a counter, as a person. He blinked. Didn't understand it quite. Wrote it down anyway, because that's what Tibbs does, a small mark off to the side, all its own, the way he'd kept his own count since the first day. I didn't have the words for why I'd said it. only that a cost had just opened up somewhere I couldn't see the bottom of, and his was the first name in it. Across the fields, the party's mutter was already spreading toward the gate, toward the carts, toward the roads that ran to the market where prices were set. My numbers weren't mine and Tibbs's anymore. They were moving. A flood of impossible loot off one nobody's afternoon, running downhill toward the one place in the world that watched every number that mattered. Someone at the top just noticed the flood. High above the market, in a room that smelled of wax and cold brass, Mercer read the flood on his own boards. He did not rise, he never rose for numbers. He sat in the plum-dark velvet long coat, silver hair swept back, and let the chalk runners come to him one at a time. Each one wiped a price down and wrote a lower one. Each one made his green eyes a little flatter. The boards told a story he had spent 40 years making impossible. Decade rare drops, common by noon. A stack out of the low fields bigger than a crown party's month. Prices sliding off the slate faster than a boy could rewrite them. The brass ledger key hung at his chest, the key that locked every price in this city, and for the first time in a long time it felt like a small thing. "Read it again," he said. The runner read it again. "Same numbers, worse numbers." Mercer turned the ledger key over in his soft hands. He had clawed up from the bottom of this world, unlucky born, nothing handed to him, and he had built a machine so that scarcity itself belonged to him. Keep the good drops rare, keep the rare drops his. That was the whole of it. Rare things stayed valuable only because he decided how few there were. A world with too much loot in it was a world with no floor to stand on, and someone had torn the floor out. He knew the shape of it, or thought he did. This was a cartel. A smuggling ring, a rival house, a warehouse of stolen goods somewhere feeding the low fields on purpose to break his prices and buy him out cheap. It was the only thing it could be. Loot did not simply appear. Someone made it, someone moved it, someone profited. That was the only law he had ever trusted, and it had never once failed him. What he could not do, sitting there with the key cold in his palm, was imagine the truth, that there was no warehouse. No ring, no rival house at all. That the flood drowning his boards came off one afternoon, off one nobody in starter cloth, a boy no runner had bothered to name, whispering at a cracked phone in a bright cyan case and editing the world's own code from the inside. That thought was not even in the room. It could not fit through the door of a man who ranked the whole world by the luck it was born with. So his certainty rose, and because it rose on a lie, it built the drop he'd take later that much taller. He set the key down flat on the slate, he smiled, and there was no warmth in it, only arithmetic. "Someone is flooding my market," he said. "Find the leak." He looked at the sliding boards one last time. "And wall the fields, all of them. Nobody digs another ounce out of the low ground until I know whose hand is in my pocket." By the next morning they'd built the wall, not stone. Mercer didn't waste stone, he wasted men. Guild colors at every field mouth, a checkpoint at the cart gate, a ledger clerk at each path writing down who went in and who came out, and how much they carried. The good fields were sealed behind a line of people whose whole job was to make sure a nobody like me never reached the ground that paid. I stood at the field edge with Tibbs and watched a farmer get turned back for want of a guild mark. The clerk didn't even look up. He pointed his chalk at the road home and the farmer went, shoulders down, empty basket knocking his knee. No mark, no fields, no drops. No drops, nothing for me to read. Behind him, a hunter in decent leather got the same. Then a pair of gatherers. The line at the mouth backed up while a guild man in Mercer's colors checked marks against a list, slow, on purpose, letting everyone feel the wall. Two more colors stood at his back with their arms crossed. This wasn't a fence you climbed. It was a fence made of people who got paid to say no. They shut it, Tibbs said. He'd walked us the long way around, and every path told the same story. Colors. Clerks. A line I couldn't cross. The whole low ground. Overnight. I ran the scan out of habit and got nothing worth having. The routine I wanted lived past the wall. A reward table down in the dungeon ground I'd hit twice before. The richest one I'd found. My saved path to it still resolved. The address was right there on my phone, narrowed and waiting. I just couldn't stand close enough to the thing to watch it fire and verify a hook. That was the trap of it, and it was a good one. Every hook I'd ever landed, I'd been standing next to when it went off. Mercer hadn't outthought my code. He'd just put a wall between me and the moment a value changes, and without that moment, I was a man with a key and no door. The cart trick wouldn't work twice. They were checking the carts now, pulling tarps, counting sacks. I watched a bag carrier get his load turned out on the ground at the gate. The old way in was shut. I thumbed the address list closed and open again, closed and open, like the answer was in there if I tapped it enough. Wade would have fought the wall. Grady would have told me to go home. I did neither. I looked at the field, and I looked at the phone, and the answer was the same answer it always was. The wall stopped my feet. It didn't stop my phone. Everything past that line was still just memory, still just values sitting at addresses, whether I could walk to them or not. I didn't need to get in. He can't walk in, so he'll see in. First though, proof I wasn't beaten. There was one scrap field they hadn't bothered to gate, the low-value patch where the leftover drops fell, not worth a clerk. I walked in free. I scanned the little throwaway loot routine there, watched a junk drop fall, rescanned the change, narrowed to the one address, and inspected it, a mean little table that paid almost nothing. I injected the same rule I always did and waited for the next fire. A gray scrap drop hit the grass, then a second one landed on top of it. Ticked to 2 where there'd been 1. Times 2, Tibbs said, and marked it small on the crowded slate. He almost laughed. Even the scraps pay double now, Milo. He credited it to my name like all the rest. It was a junk field and a junk drop and worth nothing to anyone. Small win. But my hand still worked and the wall hadn't touched the one thing that mattered. Now the wall. I sat down in the dirt facing the sealed dungeon ground and opened the source on my phone. Somewhere in the old decompiled code was the routine that drew the world from my eyes, the one that decided what I got to see and what stayed hidden behind stone and distance. I scanned for the view routine the honest way. I turned in place and watched the drawn distance change as I faced the wall, then the open field, then the wall again. The value that shifted every time was the one I wanted. Scan, turn, the number moved, rescan, narrow. My thumb worked the glass while Tibbs watched me spin in the dirt like a fool with a phone. 40 candidates. 9. 1. I inspected what it did. It was the rule that clipped my sight at solid things and hid every entity behind them. I injected my own rule in its place, draw it all. I looked up. The world lit like a debug view. TECH support, congratulations, you're painting reality now, not a screen. Try not to walk into a wall admiring it. The wall was still there, and it didn't matter, because now I could see straight through it. Mob outlines burned soft through the stone. Red aggro rings pooled on the ground where guards stood, and down under the sealed dungeon ground a whole hidden layer switched on at once. Chest markers, 3 of them, glowing where no map in this world had ever put a mark. Vault chests, buried, the kind you'd never find by walking because you'd never know to dig. 3, I said. There are 3 chests down there, nobody's ever opened. Tibbs was staring at me, not the ground. You didn't even look for it, he said, quiet. You just knew where. I stood up and walked the field edge along the outside of the wall, eyes on markers only I could see. The guards' red rings drifted on the ground ahead of me, and I stepped around them without looking, the way you'd step around a puddle. Tibbs hurried at my shoulder, watching me dodge things that weren't there to him. I stopped at the exact spot of dirt above the first buried chest. No map, no dig sign. Just the overlay in my eyes and my feet walking straight to loot no crown hunter in 30 years had found. There was a gap in the wall's footing here, a drainage cut half choked with weeds, low enough to crawl. The clerks washed the paths, not the ditch. I went down into it on my hands, out of the aggro rings, under the line, and came up in the sealed ground with the 3 chest markers burning right in front of me. I dug the first one out of the soft dungeon dirt and cracked the lid. Real weight. Real loot, sitting in a chest that had waited for a map that would never come. More routines down there meant more to reach. And more surface for me to slip a hook through. Through the site I could reach the values now, wall or no wall. I read the addresses off the hidden layer straight into the phone. 2 routines lit up worth taking. A quest payout routine, the one that handed out bounty rewards, and under it a currency mint, the routine that actually made the coin. I found each the honest way, watched a payout fire through the overlay, scanned the change, narrowed, inspected. 2 separate jobs, 2 separate addresses earned on screen. Then I injected my rule into both and waited for them to fire. The quest routine paid. My rule doubled it. Then the mint fired on top of the doubled payout and doubled that. The numbers ran into each other and stacked. My drop hook, the payout, the mint, each multiplying the last. Loot spilled out of the second chest faster than it should, then the third, coin heaping up past the lids while I watched the count on my phone spin. 4. Then past 4, it settled at 8 times what one honest kill should ever pay. I sat back in the dirt with 3 cracked chests around me and a pile between my knees that no field, walled or open, had any business giving up. The wall was still standing. I'd just gone under it, over it and through it at once, and come out the far side 8 times richer. 8, Tibbs breathed. He went to mark it and stopped, his hand hovered over the slate. There was no room. He dug in his belt for a fresh tally stick, and there wasn't one, he'd used them all. His board, the board that had carried every win since the first day, had run out of sticks at 8. He looked at the empty pouch, then at me, and for once the witness engine had nothing to count with. He turned the board over in his hands, hunting a bare corner, and there wasn't one. Every inch of slate had a mark on it and my name under all of them. So he pulled the chalk nub off its string and wrote the 8 straight across the top of the older marks, over the top of everything, because there was nowhere left to put it but on top. Times 8, he said again, like saying it could make room. The market can't ignore numbers like this. It couldn't. Down at the ledger, at a stall of brass scales and chalkboards, a woman named Bex was already finding that out. I didn't see it happen. I heard it later, and I believed every word, because I knew exactly what my flood did to a person whose whole job was to trust her own numbers. She was the appraiser. Jet black bob, amber eyes, dark green apron, a brass loop pushed up on her headband and ink dried into her cuffs. She had weighed loot at that stall for years and never once been wrong, and the whole market trusted her brass because of it. A porter set a stack of my loot on her counter and asked her to price it. She loaded the pan, dropped her weights, read the balance, and the scale gave her a number her ledger said could not exist. More weight of rare goods in one pile than her cap allowed to be real. She frowned and checked the pan for a thumb, a magnet, a shaved weight. Nothing. Clean scale, honest brass, her own hands. So she did the only thing a rules-bound professional can do. She emptied the scale and weighed it again, careful, honest, sure, some cheat of the day trick or a rigged pan was fooling her brass. Same number, same impossible number. Bigger than her ledger's ceiling, twice over. Her hands went still on the scale. She didn't cry fraud out loud, not yet, she was too good for that. She just stared the pan like it'd lie to her personally, and her voice came out low and hard and not quite steady. Reweigh it, she said, to no one, to herself, to the scale. Again. She'd reweigh it 100 times. It would say the same thing every time. That was the seed of it. The first honest witness whose own boards had started to lie, and she hated it more than any enemy could. I felt good for about a minute. Then the field edge gave me Grady. He came shuffling out of the margin the way he always did, tired gray-green eyes, brick-red leathers, that chipped pouch swinging. He looked at me pushing at the wall, at the phone, at the pile no wall could stop, and he only shook his head slow. Still at it, he said. Gravel and dust. You're smart, kid, that's the sad part. The smart ones see it coming and stop trying anyway. Save yourself the fall. He nodded at all of it like a thing already lost. Nobody stays on top, nobody. He sat down heavy on a rock at the margin, the way a man sits who's done it 1,000 times, and picked a single cheap drop out of his chipped pouch and turned it in the light. 30 years for a pouch that small. He wasn't warning me to be cruel, he was showing me the end of the road, holding it up so I'd see it early. I was the man he'd been. He was the man I'd become if I put the phone down. I didn't have an answer for him, and I didn't put it down either. I opened my mouth to say something. I never got the chance. The whole sky went white at the edges, every player's sky, the whole world's at once, a hard line of light cracking horizon to horizon like a seam splitting open. Text burned across it, huge, official, cold. The kind of announcement that comes down from above everything and everyone. A worldwide notice, spread over the top of the world for every soul to read. An update was coming. A patch. A change to the very ground my whole toolbox stood on. The crack in the sky held there, bright and waiting, and I stared up at it with the phone humming in my hand, and understood that everything I'd built could go stale the moment that seam finished tearing. The seam finished tearing, and the world read its sentence off the sky. The words hung up there in cold white light, over every field and every player at once. A patch was coming. A change to the ground itself. I stood in the margin with the phone humming and did the math no one else in this world could do. My saved paths were built for a 3-year-old version of this game. When a patch changes the world's shape, those old addresses read the wrong spots, and the whole toolbox goes stale. I didn't say it out loud. I looked down at the phone instead, and watched a thing I'd never seen it do. A number I kept pinned in the corner, my anchor offset, the one everything hung off of, flickered. Just once. A tiny stutter, like a heartbeat skipping. The world was already leaning toward the change. When that seam up there closed, the lean would become a fall, and every path I'd earned would point at nothing. So this was a clock, not a prize. A clock. I could feel it start ticking in my chest. Every hour from here was an hour with a wall at the end of it. Reach route, the deepest level, server side, before the patch, or lose the phone's whole reach in one blink and start from a nobody again. I ran a test. I picked one of my oldest saved paths, a little scrap loot address I'd carried in from the start, and I told the phone to resolve it. It resolved. The number came back right, for now. But under it, in small letters, the phone flagged the memory block as shifting, marked for the patch. That path was a bridge over a river that was about to move, and when it moved, I'd be standing on nothing. 3 years of work in my pocket, and a countdown started against all of it. Grady was still sitting on his rock, watching the sky like it had finally proved his point. There it is, he said, low. The fall, told you kid. I didn't answer him. I was already thumbing the phone open, already scanning, because the answer to a clock is simple and stupid, and it whispers right at you. Go faster. Hook everything. Beat the seam. Reach root before the world changes shape, so hook faster, and that's the mistake. I forced the next one. There was a reward routine humming past the wall, a big one, a boss loot table I could feel through sight like heat off a stove. I didn't do it slow. I had a seam in the sky. I grabbed a candidate list that was still 40 wide, still full of guesses, and I wrote my rule into the fattest one without waiting to watch it change twice. Thumb on the glass, list barely narrowed, and I told it to double anyway. It paid. The loot table dumped double straight into my pile, a fat measured stack, real numbers, mine. And the field around it broke. The mobs nearest the routine stuttered. They walked into each other, snapped a pace left, then a pace right, out of sync with their own bodies. A patch of ground flickered, tiles blinking on and off like a bad screen. My greedy right had hit a neighbor value too, and the whole little region glitched where I'd been careless. Then I felt the ground answer. Far off, from a windowless gray hall that hums low under everything, a door opened. The wardens came out of the keep in a line, steel blue armor that hummed as they moved, thin white seams of light down every plate. They didn't run, they marched straight and certain toward my flickering tiles. Watchdog heat. A sloppy hook glitches a region and the wardens march at the glitch. The mobs kept stuttering. One walked half into the flickering ground and hung there, cut off at the knees, its own body arguing with the tile it stood on. A plank of the world was blinking, and everything that touched it caught the blink. At the front of the line, one visor rode up. A face on the faceless order. Ash-white stubble, still as stone, and eyes so pale they were almost no color at all, the flat gray of a thing built to scan. Cord, he didn't look at me. He looked at the flickering tiles, at the symptom, and read it the way I read a memory dump. He raised one gauntlet and the desynced tiles froze under his attention, held, quarantined. The blinking stopped. The half-sunk mob snapped back onto solid ground and stood there like nothing had happened. He was 300 paces off, and he never once glanced at the man in startercloth by the wall. He was reading the wound. He wasn't looking for the knife. The order he ran hunted the glitch, the flicker, the sick tile, never the hand. And my hand had just made the sickest tile in the field and was still holding the phone that did it. I backed out of the glitch slow, phone dark against my leg, heart going hard. The hook had paid. It had also lit a flare over my own head, and the thing that came running was armored and certain and had a face now. I understood the trade in one breath. Clean hooks only now. Slow is safe, fast is loud. Tibbs found me at the margin, bored out, already counting. That table dumped double, he said, chalk moving. He'd watched the pile land from across the field. He marked it up his crowded slate, the greedy win, the dirty one, because a win is a win, and Tibbs banks all of them. Even the leavings run double these days. Then he squinted toward the frozen tiles and the line of armor standing over them. But that one woke the keep, he said. Do the quiet kind. So I did the quiet kind, right there, to prove the lesson to myself. Small field routine, ungated, nothing fancy. I scanned it honest this time. Watched a drop counter tick up on a kill, rescanned for the value that increased, watched it tick again, narrowed 40 candidates down to 9, down to 1. Found the exact address, inspected the routine, injected the double, verified on the very next fire. The drops came up doubled, clean stack, no stutter, not one tile blinked. The mobs kept their feet, the sky stayed shut. No door opened in the gray hall. Tibbs marked it and grinned. That's the one, he said. Every crumb's worth 2 now, and this one didn't wake the keep. Same money. No flare. That was the whole difference, and I just felt it in my hands. But quiet wasn't enough on its own. The wardens marched at glitches, and even a clean hook leaves a fast-moving number behind for a sharp eye to chase. I needed a right that didn't move at all, a right the world couldn't undo and couldn't feel wobble. I found it at a bridge. It was an old rope and plank span over a gorge, and it was dying. A crowd of low players stood bunched at the near end, afraid to cross because the bridge's integrity was draining. I could see it through the phone, a value counting down, plank by plank, toward the number where the whole thing dropped into the gorge. That falling number was my gift, a value I could watch change on its own. I scanned it while it dropped, rescanned for the value that decreased, watched it fall again, narrowed the list as the planks groaned. 49-1. I had the exact address of the bridge's life in my hand, ticking down toward 0. And instead of writing a new number, I did the new thing. I pinned it. Tech support freezing just means writing the same number back every single tick, faster than the world can change it, so it stops moving. Tech support congratulations, you just invented the word no. I pinned the integrity at whole, 100%. Locked. The falling number caught mid-fall and held. 100. Then 100 again. 100, 100, 100, the phone writing it faster than the gorge could pull. In sight, a thin ring closed around the whole span, a small lock glowing at its center, hanging there over the planks. The planks stopped groaning. The bridge went still and solid under a load it should have dropped. I put my phone in my pocket and walked out onto it, over the gorge, on a thing the game had already decided should fall, and it held my weight like stone because the number simply could not move anymore. I felt the gorge under the planks, a long drop into nothing, and the ropes didn't so much as creak. The world wanted this bridge dead. The number said whole, and the number won. The crowd at the near end saw me standing out over the empty air and didn't believe it. A kid came first, then a handful behind him, then the whole bunched crowd, streaming across a span that should have been at the bottom of the gorge. Their boots drummed the planks. The integrity never dropped a point, nothing flickered. No door opened in the gray hall. This was the quiet kind, and it saved a crowd. Then I went to find something bigger to freeze. The field boss was a colossus, 3 stories of it, mid-swing at a scattering party when I reached it. I read its rage value through the phone, the number that drives it to attack, climbing as it wound up the blow. Watched it climb, rescanned the increased value, narrowed, found the address of its fury. Then I pinned that too. Rage frozen. The number stopped dead at the top of its arc. The colossus locked mid-swing. One arm up, weapon raised over the whole party, muscles carved and straining and going nowhere. Frozen. In sight, a bright ring snapped shut around the raised arm, a small lock glowing at its center, holding the whole pose in place. I walked underneath the raised blade of a thing that could flatten the field, reading my phone, checking the pin held. It held. A monster the size of a house, stopped like a painting, while a man in starter cloth strolled through its shadow. Grady had followed me out to the margin. He saw the bridge hold. He saw the colossus freeze mid-swing with me walking under its blade. 30 years of surrender stood on his face and cracked, just a hairline. "That's not luck," he said, quiet, almost to himself. First words I ever heard him say that weren't about quitting. I didn't stop to answer. I couldn't. The count keeps climbing while the clock ticks down. The freezes didn't stack the drops. But the clean hooks behind them did, and they were compounding now, quiet job on quiet job. I locked 2 more the honest way while the boss stood frozen. Watched a value change, rescanned, narrowed, inspected, injected, verified. Each its own separate job, nothing given for free. And each one landed clean, no flicker, no door in the gray hall. The stack doubled, and doubled on the double. Times 16. Tibbs called it before I did. His board had run out of room a whole section ago, and now he just wrote the new number over the top of the 8, over the top of everything, because there was nowhere else to put it. 16, he said. He said it low, not loud. He learned that fast is loud too. 16 times a nobody's take, and the market's already choking on it. It was. Down at the ledger the flood had done its work. A porter carried word up from the stalls, and the word was, Wade. Wade's rare drop, the crown jewel of his whole born lucky status, a 1 in 100 prize he wore like a medal, its price had wobbled. For the first time ever. So much of everything was flooding the market that even his rarest thing wasn't rare anymore, and the boards had ticked its price down a notch. 1 notch. On a number that had never once moved in his favor. Word was, Wade had stood at the price board a long time. White and gold coat, crimson sash, the rare drops he wore as jewelry catching the light like always. But the mockery was gone out of him. He just watched the one number that made him special slip a notch, tap the board once like it might tick back up, and it didn't. He didn't know how, or who, or why. He only knew the thing that had never moved had moved, and it had moved the wrong way. He'd built a whole life on a 1 in 100 birth roll. Somewhere, a nobody in starter cloth had made the whole 100 worthless, and Wade would never once think to look at a bag boy with a cracked phone. Tibbs banked it. Milo's 16, Wade's notch down. Same slate, same name under all of it. And the whole time the wardens patrolled the fields for glitches, marching at every flicker, hunting the sloppy and the loud. They walked right past my clean pins. A frozen boss reads as a healthy value to them. A locked bridge reads as a bridge doing fine. The cleaner I hooked, the more the world told them it was well. The thing built to catch cheaters can't see him, and that's the whole game. In the keep it was quiet, and Cord took the quiet as proof. He stood in the gray hall where the wardens muster and read the reports rolling up off the system's own routines. He trusted those routines the way a man trusts his own hands. They were the game's truth, checking itself, and they came back clean. Integrity nominal. Values stable. The bridge in the low fields, whole. The field boss, within range. Every system call he leaned on told him the world was healthy, and he believed them because that was his whole faith. He had seen the glitch, of course. The desync, the flickering tiles, quarantined now under his gauntlet. A corruption had touched the world. Something was rotting it at the edges, somewhere his instruments couldn't quite point. But the deep reports came back clean, and clean meant contained. He did not know that the cleaner the reports, the closer the rot. He did not know that every stable value his routine swore to was a value a man had frozen by hand, and that the honest system was reporting a lie it could not feel. His instruments were the blindfold. His certainty was the blindfold. The steadier the world looked, the surer he grew, and the surer he grew, the less he could ever see the man doing it. He watched the quarantined tiles stop flickering and took it for a victory. Then he turned to the mustering hall, and the wardens rose off their benches in a line of humming steel, and the visor came down over the still pale eyes. He would march on the flicker, on the symptom, on the glitch he could see, chasing it field by field, while the real hand worked silent and clean on the side he trusted most. He vowed to purge the corruption he could not name. The ledger smelled like brass and chalk dust, and Bex was weighing a stack that shouldn't exist. I stood 3 stalls back, hood up, phone low against my hip. Nobody looks at a bag boy in a market, they look at the scales. And her scales were lying to her, over and over, and she couldn't make them stop. The stack was mine. Hook drops, moved down through Tibbs, sold plain across 4 stalls so no one number rang too loud. But 4 small floods make one big one, and it had all pooled here on her pan. 62 of a thing her ledger said should exist maybe 6 times a year. 62. She weighed it once, her amber eyes went flat. "Reweigh it," she said. Her assistant tipped the pan, reset the brass, poured the stack back on. The needle swung and settled on the same mark, 62, against a 10-year cap that topped out at 8. Bex leaned in with the loop down over one eye, ink-stained cuffs pushed back, and read the needle like it had insulted her. Her whole job was to trust that needle. It was the one honest thing on the floor. "Reweigh it again," she said. Quieter, worse. 3rd time, same swing. Same settle, 62. I watched her do the thing I needed her to do, and I didn't say a word. On my phone, the cell routine's output still hung on the address list, a value I'd narrowed this morning, and it was live now, feeding her boards a number they were built to call impossible. She checked the pan for a false bottom, ran a thumb under the brass lip. Swapped in the spare scale from under the stall, the one she kept for exactly this, and weighed the stack a 4th time, 62. Then she weighed a known 1-pound test slug and got 1 pound back, exact, so the scale was honest. The scale was honest and the number was insane, and those 2 facts couldn't both be true, and she was the woman whose whole life said they had to be. "The scale's clean," her assistant said. "I know the scale's clean." Her voice had gone thin. "That's the problem." She thought fraud. I could see her building it behind her eyes, a rigged weight, a bribed porter, a smuggling ring flooding the ring from some field Mercer hadn't walled yet. Every answer she reached for was a crooked man somewhere. Not once did she reach for the true one, that a nobody in starter-cloth was standing 3 stalls back editing the world through a cracked phone. That answer wasn't on her shelf. It made her better than a friend, right then. A friend wants to believe you. Bex wanted to bury me, and she still couldn't make the number go away. Tibbs was at my elbow, mustard smock, slate out, chalk nub already moving. 62 logged and appraised, he murmured, and cut the mark low. 8 was the year's high. She just wrote 62 on her own board. He grinned sideways. "That's her hand doing it, not mine." That was the whole trick of a hostile witness. When I said my numbers were real, I was a bag boy bragging. When Bex logged them into her own ledger, teeth gritted, hating every stroke, the market believed it in a way I could never buy. She logged it. I watched her write the 62 into the daybook in her own precise hand, because the rules said an appraised weight gets recorded even when the appraiser wants to set it on fire. Rules bound. That was the lever. She'd sooner doubt her own eyes than break her own book. Then she pulled the last 3 days off the ledger and ran the count backward, hunting the crack. Day 1, 11 appraised where the year high was 8. Day 2, 29. Today, 62. A curve, not a spike. Climbing, doubling, worse each morning. She traced it with one ink-stained finger, and I watched her understand that whatever this was, it wasn't a one-time smuggler's dump. It was a tide. It was still coming in. 11/29/62. Tibbs read off her own boards under his breath, delighted, cutting each into his slate. "She's counting it for me now. Saves me the chalk." A crowd had started to gather at the sound of a scale being rerun 4 times. Porters, a couple of guild clerks, a fruit seller who smelled blood. A dozen faces, then 20, then too many to count. Bex felt them at her back and her spine went straighter, and that was worse for her, because now she had to be right in front of witnesses. An appraiser who reweighs a stack 5 times has already told the whole floor the number scared her. She knew it. She weighed it again anyway, a 5th time, because stopping was its own confession. 62. She set the brass down very carefully, the way you set down a thing you'd like to throw. She pulled Wade's kind of stock next. Not to help me. To disprove me, to find the honest anchor that would make my flood look like the lie it had to be. She set a single certified rare on the small pan, the sort of drop that made careers, and read its logged price off the board to steady herself. The board said that rare had held its price for 10 years. She looked at my 60-second common. She looked at the one rare. She did the sum a market does without being told, the sum that turns scarcity into money, and I watched it land on her like cold water. If the common wasn't rare anymore, the rare wasn't worth what the board said, and if my flood kept coming, the gap would close all the way. The rare drop that built a fortune, she said, mostly to herself, loop still down, is about to become common. She didn't know she'd said the quiet part out loud until the clerk beside her wrote it down. I moved. Not far. Along the back of the stalls to where the big 10-year board hung, the one with Mercer's brass ledger keyhole in its frame, the board that fixed the price of the crown rares across the whole ring. That board hadn't moved in 10 years, because Mercer didn't let it. Scarcity was his machine. He kept the rares rare by owning the fields they dropped in, and the board was the machine's face. I'd already found its address the honest way, days back, sold one certified rare cheap through Tibbs, watched the board tick, and narrowed it down to one. Now the price field sat on my phone, live. I hadn't written to it. My flood was doing the writing, sale by sale, through the honest market feeding the honest board. I just watched the number I'd found start to fall on its own. The board was chalk over slate, updated by a clerk who walked a ladder, except the market moved faster than his ladder now. Word ran up from the stalls, 62 commons appraised, another 40 logged at the next ring over, the flood everywhere at once, and the standing price on a decade rare cracked for the first time in 10 years. The clerk climbed his ladder to wipe the old number. The crowd went quiet, the way a room does when something that's supposed to be nailed down starts to slide. He wiped the 10-year price. He wrote the new one under it, a third off the top, gone in a chalk stroke. Then, before he'd even climbed down, another porter shouted a fresh flood count from the low stalls, and he had to wipe it again and write a third figure, lower still, half of what the morning board had said. Twice in 1 minute. On a board that hadn't moved since before half the market was born, the floor did the thing floors do. A clerk 2 stalls down started dumping his own rare stock before it fell further, and his selling drove the number down again, so a fourth figure went up, and the falling fed the falling. The crown price had held at one mark for 10 years, and now it couldn't hold still for 60 seconds. Every rare holder in earshot went pale at once, doing the same cold sum. The thing that made them rich was turning common while they watched, and the only move left was to sell into a crash that their selling made worse. Down on Tibbs's slate, the deltas stacked. 2 clean hooks I'd landed that morning on the mint feed and the appraisal tax routine, each doubling on the X116 I'd carried in. He read them off low. 32 times a nobody's take. He underlined it. 16 doubled. The stack that had made Beck's reweigh 3 times was half of what stood on his board now. The board's been the same for 10 years, Beck said. She wasn't appraising anymore. She was just watching it fall. It just moved, twice. Wade was there by then. Of course he was. White and gold coat, crimson sash, his rare drops worn like jewelry catching the tin roof light. He'd come to watch his own crown hold, and instead he watched it crater. His signature rare, the 1 in 100 prize his whole name hung on, was on that board, and the board had just wiped its price to a third of the morning's number, and a bag boy's flood of commons was the reason. Tibbs called the tally across the ring, loud this time because a fall this size wants a witness. Wade's rare, 1 on the board. He struck it. Milo's stack, 32 times over, common as dirt and still counting, same slate, same name under all of it. Wade tapped the board once, the way he had before, like it might climb back. It didn't. It ticked down another chalk line while his finger was still on it. My drop made my name, he said. Not to me, to no one. His counts just buried it. The economy bent right there in the open, in front of clerks and porters and a fruit seller, and every one of them saw a rare go common on Mercer's own board and did the cold math a market does. Mercer's scarcity machine had just seized in public, and Mercer wasn't even here to feel it. And here's the thing they didn't know, the thing that sat quiet in my thumb the whole time. I could end him. Right now. I had the currency mint routine found and hooked, the one that prints the guild's coin. It was on my phone. Live. One right away from flooding the whole economy to zero and taking Mercer's fortune down to chalk dust in an afternoon. Not a price wobble. A collapse. The whole plum-coated empire, gone today by my hand. I looked at the mint field on the address list. I looked at the right I could make, then I closed it. Thumb off the glass. The hook stayed as a double, quiet, invisible, doing its slow, honest work, but the big right I could have pushed, I didn't push. Because loud is how the wardens find you. Crash the coin today and Cord marches from the keep on the biggest glitch he's ever read, and he doesn't march on me, he can't see me, he marches on the flood. On the market. On the porters carrying my numbers. On Tibbs, standing in the open with a slate that has my name written 32 times across it. And I wasn't at root yet. Everything I held was player side, client side, a nobody's edits on the surface of the world. The update was coming to move every block my saved paths pointed at, and when it landed clean, the whole toolbox goes stale in a breath. On my phone, low against my hip, my own anchor offset flickered once, there, then not, then there, the drift creeping in a hair early. The clock, tightening where only I could see it. Winning loud today spends Tibbs to gut a man I can gut for free later, from a place he can't reach me. Root means server side, and I'm not there yet. So I banked the win I took and swallowed the one I didn't, and I turned my back on the crown board while it was still falling, and I walked. Tibbs fell in beside me, slate under his arm. On the way out, a side stall paid, a small clean routine I'd hooked days back on the scrap appraisal feed, ticking away where nobody watched. Its count rolled over as I passed. Tibbs saw it without breaking stride, cut a fast mark, and grinned. Even the sweepings pay twice now. One more routine, one more rung, banked and gone. We didn't stop for it. 32 everywhere, even in the gutters of the ring. Out past the market gate, the low fields ran up to a guild wall, Mercer's wall, the one from before, the one I still couldn't walk through. 15 feet of dressed stone, 2 guards at the only gate, a walled field of ripe drops on the far side I'd never once touched. I hadn't beaten the wall. I'd stopped trying to beat the wall. You don't argue with a value you can't move, you go around it, over the meta instead of through the world, so I found my own clock. Tech supper tea. That's a speed hack. Scale your own tick rate and you get to act 8 times for every 1 tick everyone else gets, client side, so the world outside your head never even notices. I scanned my own game speed field and narrowed it down through a guard's slow blink. I wrote it. 1 times became 8 times. My clock, not the world's, client side, mine alone. The field didn't speed up. I did. A faint spinning X8 hung at the edge of my sight, there for no one but me. The far guard started to blink. I crossed the whole walled field before he finished it, my own path blurring into afterimages only I could see. 15 feet of wall, the gap at the gate, the guard's eyes coming down and not yet up, and in the space of that one blink I was through, past both of them, standing in the ripe field on the far side with my hood still settling. They never turned. To them I hadn't moved. To me the world had gone slow as syrup, and I just walked through the pause. Wade had trailed the crowd out to the gate to watch his ruin, and Wade saw it. Not the how, just the impossible. The guards blinked, he said, and you were through. I didn't answer. I was already looking at my phone because something was wrong. The tick rate address I'd just written, the one I'd narrowed clean a minute ago, its value had drifted a hair off the mark I'd pinned it to. And when I pulled up a saved path, a 3-year-old pointer I'd trusted since the old game, the one I'd walked 100 times, it resolved 1 block low. Close. Not right. My saved paths were starting to read wrong, 1 block low. I stood in the right field on the far side of Mercer's wall and stared at a number that used to be true. The saved path was 3 years old. I'd walked it 100 times. Type the pointer, follow the chain, land on the drop count for this field. I typed it now, thumb knowing the shape of it without looking. It landed 1 block low. The value that came back read 7. The field's real count, paying out on the grass in front of me, was closer to 100. 7. A dead number sitting where my map said gold should be. I pulled the path again, same wrong answer. 7. TE support. That address you trusted wandered off. The game moved the value, your directions are pointing at garbage now. The update was doing that early. I scanned fresh instead. Watched a drop hit the grass, rescanned on the tick, narrowed it down until there was the real field count, alive and paying, 3 blocks up from where my saved path swore it lived. My hooks were still on it. My X32 still held. I hadn't lost anything yet. But the map I trusted to find it had lied to me. And I had 11 saved paths, and I didn't know which of the other 10 were still true. Trouble? Tibbs had come through the gate behind me, slate under his arm, breathing hard from the run. My directions are going stale, I said. The update's moving the furniture. He didn't understand the words. He understood my face. He looked down at the slate, where 32 sat written over the top of everything, and he didn't cut a mark. He just held it a little tighter. I went down the list, 1 path at a time, thumb ticking through them. Path 2, the currency mint hook, the big one I'd chosen not to fire. Still true. Path 3, the appraisal tax feed. Wrong. Path 4, a scrap routine. Wrong by 2 blocks now. 5 of 11 had walked, 6 still held. And path 2, the clean one, flickered on the glass while I looked at it. There, then not, then there. The furniture, sliding. A stale path doesn't announce itself. It hands you a number that looks honest. I re-verified path 2. Clean. I re-verified the live field count under my thumb. Clean, but there were 6 fields running my hooks across this side of the wall, and I'd rechecked exactly one of them. The other 5 were still pointed at furniture that might already have moved. I should have stopped and rescanned all 6 right there. I didn't. A runner came over the wall top on the far watch. A warden horn sounded thin and low from the direction of the keep, and somewhere out in the 3rd field, one of my hooks fired on its own schedule, on the next drop, whether I was ready or not. The update had moved that field's block an hour ago. My saved path hadn't caught up. The hook rode anyway. One bad hook and the whole region lit up. The 3rd field went wrong all at once. The drops on the grass stuttered, doubled into copies of themselves, snapped back to nothing. The grass itself flickered between green and a dead gray checkerboard, the raw floor under the world showing through. My hook had fired onto a stale offset, and the game was trying to render a value that wasn't there. My phone screamed a red flag up the glass. Stale right. The field count for that patch didn't read X32 anymore. It read 1. A whole field I'd claimed, 32 times over, wiped down to a single honest drop like I'd never touched it, not lost in a fight. Not stolen. Gone stale under me. Tibbs saw the field die from the gate. He looked at the gray checkerboard where a fortune had been paying a breath ago. Then he looked at his slate, at the 32, and he wiped it. Chalk nub on his string, one hard drag of his thumb, and the mark for that field came off the board. His hand shook doing it. He'd never once erased a mark of mine. He erased this one because it wasn't true anymore, and Tibbs does not write down things that aren't true. The horn again, closer. Out past the 3rd field the keep had answered. Steel blue armor came over the low rise in a line, white light seams burning, visors down, wardens marching on the biggest glitch they'd read all week, my glitch. Not on me. They can't see me. They marched on the symptom, 40 feet from where I stood with the phone in my hand. I ran. Not brave, just fast, back through the gate, and the drift of my own speed hack stuttered under my feet, 8 times going 7, then 8, then 7. I stumbled. The phone came half out of my hand, cyan case skidding on my palm, the whole engine, the 3-year source, one bad grip from the grass and a warden's boot. I caught it against my chest with both hands and kept running. Nearly, just nearly. But nearly is the closest that phone has ever come to the ground. I got to the field edge, out of the warden line's read, and dropped behind a low stone lip with my back against it, breathing like I'd crossed the whole map. On the glass the 3rd field still read 1, the struck mark still gone from Tibbs's slate. My clock still stuttering 7 to 8. Grady was already there. He sat at the field edge the way he always sat, stooped and slow, the brick red leathers cracked at every fold, the chipped little pouch of cheap drops on his knee. He'd watched the whole thing. He didn't gloat, that was the worst of it. He just watched me with those tired gray-green eyes, and when he spoke, it was almost gentle. There it is, Grady said. That's the day. I didn't answer. My clock ticked 787 on the glass. I've had that day 100 times, kid. He turned the pouch over in his hands. You find a trick. The trick works. You think this time it holds, and then the world changes the rule out from under you and the trick's just chalk on your hands. He nodded at the gray field. 32 down to 1. Poof. I watched you build that all morning. It's a stale offset, I said. I can re-find it. Sure you can. And then the update lands for real and moved everything, not one field, all of it, every block, every path you own. His voice never rose. That's what made it land. So you re-find it, and one day you're 50 and stooped and you've got a pouch this big to show for a life of refinding, and you finally understand what I'd been telling you since the green field. He leaned in. Why keep hooking when the update wipes it all? There it was, the real question. Not Wade's mockery, not Cord's horn, the quiet one. The one that's true. He was right about the update. It was coming. It would move everything. Every path I owned would go stale in a breath, the same way that field just had, except all at once. My whole toolbox, chalk dust. He wasn't wrong. He was just early and worn out, and he'd let being right about the wipe talk him into quitting before it. And there was a version of me that took the pouch and sat down. Keep Tibbs safe. Stop drawing wardens onto the market, onto the porters, onto the slate with my name on it. 31 times. Stopping would keep him safe. Stopping was the loving thing. Stopping was surrender wearing a kind face, and it was the exact face looking at me from inside those brick red leathers. Tibbs came over the lip and sat down beside me. He didn't say anything to Grady. He just set the slate across his knees and looked at the struck mark, the empty place where 32 used to be. And he waited. Not for me to quit. For me to give him something true to write back down. Because the honest work still works, I said. Watch. I got up off the stone. The field was still gray, still flickering, wardens still combing the far side of it for a glitch that had no man attached, but the drops themselves were real. The count was real. It read 1 now because that's what an unhooked field pays, 1 honest drop. My hooks were gone. My map was wrong. Fine, I'd found this field cold 3 years ago with nothing but a scan, and I could find it cold again. No saved path, not one. I threw them all out. I scanned fresh. I stood at the field edge with the phone flat in my palm and did the oldest thing I know, unknown value. First scan, wide open, thousands of candidates. Then I waited for the world to move. A drop hit the grass, real, a single honest one, the count ticking up by 1 where I could see it. I rescanned on that change, thousands fell to 61. Another drop, another tick, rescan on the increase. 61 fell to 9. I made it move again, knocked a low mob, watched a drop shake loose, 9 fell to 1. 1 address. Fresh, true, the field's live count under my thumb, verified against a change I'd watched with my own eyes. Not a map's promise, a witnessed value. I inspected the routine that paid it, the plain little loop that hands out 1 drop per kill, and I injected the rule, the same rule, the honest hook, this fires, double it. I waited for the next drop, watched the routine run, watched the output come out the far side, 2. The next drop paid 2, clean. No flicker, no gray. No red flag up the glass. The grass stayed green. The wardens, 40 feet off, kept combing the dead patch of the old glitch and never turned, because a clean hook reads as a healthy value, and a healthy value is invisible to them. I'd learned that the hard way an hour ago. Now I used it on purpose. Then I stacked it the way I'd built the whole ladder, the field's own bonus routine, found the same honest way. Wait for a witness change, narrow the list, inspect the routine, lay the hook, hold for the next fire to prove it. Double on double. The count climbed. 4. 8. On up the rungs I'd earned once already, re-earned now 1 clean job at a time. Back to 32, same field. Same number, rebuilt from a cold scan in 1 clean pass while Warden stood 40 feet away and saw nothing wrong, because nothing was wrong. It was honest. Tibbs was already up, chalk nub out. He watched the count cross 32 on his own read of the field, and he cut the mark back onto the slate, 32, written back over the empty place he'd struck it from, harder this time, pressing the chalk in. The win, remarked. Restored, because it was true again, and Grady stood up. He hadn't stood up for anything in 30 years, he stood now. The pouch slid off his knee into the grass, and he didn't reach for it. He looked at the field paying double, and at the wardens not coming, and at me putting the phone back against my hip, and the tired gray-green eyes had something in them I hadn't seen there once. You just, his voice caught, you lost it, I watched you lose it, and you just did it again. He said it like a man doing a sum that keeps coming out impossible. From nothing, you built it back from nothing. First flicker. 30 years of quit, and 1 crack of light through it. The trick doesn't hold, I said. You're right about that. Nothing I write holds. The update wipes the map. I picked up his pouch and put it back in his hand. But I'm not the trick, the finding is, and the update can't wipe that. He looked at the pouch. He looked at the field. He didn't sit back down. I stood there with a client value I'd lost and re-earned by hand, 32 rebuilt from a cold scan, and something turned over in my head that hadn't been there this morning. Every value I'd ever touched was client side, player side, a nobody's edits on the surface of the world, the kind the update walks all over. I'd just proven I could lose one and take it back with nothing but a scan and my own 2 hands. So, if I could re-earn a value the game let me touch, could I earn one it didn't? Not a drop count on my side of the wire. A value the world itself calls true. A number the server hands down and everybody, wardens included, believes without checking. A server 1. I looked at my phone, at the fresh true offset under my thumb, and for the first time I stopped thinking about the field in front of me and started thinking about the wire underneath it. If I can re-earn a client value by hand, can I reach a server 1? I started with what I already knew how to do, a client edit, the kind I'd built the whole ladder on. I found a plain coin count on my own side of the wire, thumb on the glass. I held still and let the world move first. A copper dropped in the stall next to me, the count ticked up by 1 where I could see it, and thousands of candidates collapsed to 12. I waited for the next sale, caught the tick, and scanned again. 12 fell to 1. 1 address. I wrote it up, 10 coins where there'd been 1. On my screen it held clean and bright. Then Bex waited. She set my 10 on her brass pan without knowing they were mine, and her pan called them 1. The number on my glass shivered, fought, snapped back. 1 coin, the way it started. Rubber band. The world's own record had reached over and smoothed me out, quiet as a hand over a sheet, and there was nothing I could do about it. My edit lived on my side and died on hers. TEC support. Your phone can say whatever it wants. The server keeps the real book, and the real book just corrected you. So I stopped scanning what I saw. I scanned for what the ledger trusted. I watched her book instead of my screen. A real sale closed 2 stalls down, a hide, logged, the ledger's own tally rolling over by 1 where I could read it over Bex's shoulder. I scanned on that change. Not my count, its count. Thousands of candidates. Another logged sale, another honest tick in her book, rescan on the increase. Down to 40, a third sale, down to 9, a fourth, down to 1. One address. Not a thing I saw. A thing the world had recorded as true. I inspected it, the little routine that writes a sale into the ledger's own book, the line every scale in the ring reads and believes. I didn't touch a price. I didn't crash a coin. I injected one honest rule, spawn a single hide into the book, logged clean, exactly the way an ordinary closed sale writes one in. Then I waited for the routine to fire, and I watched the far side. A hide appeared in Bex's record, one she never weighed, one no hunter had carried in. And it held, no shiver, no snapback, no rubber band. Her pan didn't fight it because her pan was never asked. The book already called it real, and the book is what the whole world checks against. I'd made a thing from nothing, and the world's own record kept it as true. Bex went still over her loop. She'd spent a month hunting a rigged scale, a false bottom, a smuggler with a magnet. Something a person does to a number. She lifted the hide off the shelf and set it on the pan, and the pan gave her its true weight, and her book already had it logged at that weight before she wrote a stroke. She weighed it twice more. Same. She checked the test slug against the pan, 1 pound, true. She checked under the pan for a false bottom and found honest wood. Every part of her trade agreed on a hide that had no source. There was nothing to catch, nothing rigged. The lie was true, and a true lie isn't a fraud at all. That's not a fraud, she said, to no one. Low. Like the floor had moved under her. A fraud I could find. This I can't. A month of certainty, gone in the time it took a hide to log. Behind her, on the crown board, the 10-year rare sat at a third of its old price and still sliding. I looked at it while her whole theory died in her hands. Wade's whole name was a rare roll. It's worthless now. He found me on the fields by noon. I was crouched at a low field's edge, phone flat in my palm, when the white and gold coat came across the grass with 6 guild hunters strung out behind it. Wade. Platinum hair slicked flat crimson sash, rare drops worn on him like jewelry, and every stone he had on was worth a third of what it had been a week ago. He stopped over me the way you stop over something you'd scrape off a boot. Up, he said, on your feet, scrap boy. I stood. The 6 fanned out behind him. Past them, at the fence line, Tibbs waited with the slate, copper hair, mustard smock, chalk nub already out on its string. Wade didn't look at him once. Wade looked at me like I was the answer to a question that had been eating him alive for a week. You farm scraps, he said. We farm fortunes. That's the order of the world, and it doesn't change. His jaw worked. So you tell me how a starter cloth nobody floods my market. I said nothing. I don't feed pressure. I let it spend itself out. Behind him, the 6 shifted their feet. One of them kept glancing back toward the ring, toward the boards, the way a man does when his own purse is tied to a number that's moving the wrong way. Wade's flood had dragged the whole guild stones down with it. His hunters weren't here for me. They were here because their leader needed to be seen doing something about the man draining their fortunes, and standing over a bag boy in a field was the only something he had left. That should be mine. His voice cracked on the word, and he caught it, smoothed it flat. The counts, the stacks, all of it. I have the roll for it, you have nothing. He leaned down close. It's a trick. Everything you touch is a trick, and a trick can be found. Find the trick, he said, soft now, saying Mercer's words on Mercer's leash, and it's over. That's the whole shape of it, right there. Wade hunts a trick, Cord hunts a glitch, Mercer hunts a cartel. 3 of them digging for a thing that isn't there, because the thing that is there is a kid with a cracked phone, and not one of them can make that shape fit inside his head. The rare on Wade's sash had crossed the crown board at 800 coins a week ago. I'd watched it go by at 240 this morning and still falling. He knew the figure. You could see him not saying it. A man whose whole worth is one lucky number, watching the number rot in public, standing over the one face in the ring that isn't afraid of him and getting nothing back. I didn't answer him. I looked past his shoulder at Tibbs and the slate. Let the tally answer him. And while Wade stood there spending words, my thumb was still on the glass. A low junk routine I'd hooked at dawn fired on its own honest schedule, a scrap drop. The throwaway kind nobody stoops to pick up, doubled clean. 2, where there'd been 1. Tibbs caught the field tick and marked it without even looking down. Even the scraps pay double now, he called across the grass, flat and loud enough to carry. The count answered before I could. He wanted the trick, so I gave him the tally. I stood and walked, and because a fight was what he'd come for, he followed, the 6 behind him, Tibbs ahead of us with the slate. Off the fields, down into the ledger, into the market ring with the brass scales and the chalkboards, the whole place that had priced Wade's name for years. That's where a status dies. In front of the ones who set the price. Wade's signature rare had its own line on the crown board. Everyone in the ring knew it. The stone that made him, one drop, a 1% roll, the luckiest morning of his life, and he'd worn it and dined on it and lorded it for years. Tibbs set the slate up on the counting stone where the whole ring could see it. He didn't shout. He counted, the way he counts everything, honest to the last stick. Wade's rare, he said, and chalked 1 mark. 1. 1 on the board, 1 on his sash, the way it's always been. Then he moved to the column where my flood of that same stone was logged, the rare gone common, the ones I dumped into the ring all week through plain little bag boy sales. Milo's. Same stone, the same drop that made the name. He counted it down the slate, stick by stick, out loud, 41. 41 of Wade's once-in-a-lifetime rare. Against Wade's one. Bex was at her pan 10 feet off. She didn't want to say it, her rules made her. The stone's the same, she said, tight through her teeth. Grade for grade, his 41 weigh true against his one, her own scale, her own boards, selling it harder than any friend of mine ever could. The ring did the thing markets do. It went quiet, and then it went loud. A rare isn't rare at 41 to 1. A name built on a lucky drop isn't a name at all when the drop is common as gravel, and every soul in the ring was doing that sum at once. Somebody at the far scales called out an offer for the stone at 90 coins, then somebody undercut them at 60 before the first bid landed, and the crown board took another stroke down under Bex's chalk. 800 a week ago, not 200 now. A price falls fastest the moment a crowd stops believing in it, and I was watching a whole crowd stop at once. Wade stood in the middle of it. He looked at the 1 mark and at the 41, and at the board behind them where his price kept sliding down under everyone's eyes, and something just went out of him. The Jim-perfect shoulders, the leash certainty. All of it drained out at once. My drop made my name, he said, quiet, to the dead stone on his own sash. His counting just drowned it out. I banked it, and I felt the wrongness of it in the same breath. 41 to 1, read aloud across the ring, Tibbs' name-calling voice carrying clean to the walls. A win that loud doesn't stay a secret. Numbers this loud bring the wardens. I should have stopped there. I stacked instead. The flood was already loud, so I fed it, one more routine, found the honest way while the ring still churned around Wade. A field bonus line, paying its little cut per sale 2 stalls down. I let a real sale do the pointing. It closed, the bonus ticked, and thousands narrowed to 40, then to 1. I inspected it, the plain loop that hands the bonus over. Then the hook. This fires, double it. I waited for the next sale. The bonus came out, the far side doubled, clean, no flicker on the glass. Double on the 32, 64. 64 times a starter cloth, nobody's honest day, stacked on 1 slate in the middle of a market that had just watched a rare go common. Tibbs wrote the 6 and the 4 over the top of everything, no room left on the slate, pressing the chalk in hard. Then I turned on sight. I'd hooked the view routine weeks back, the rule that clips what you're allowed to see, rewritten to draw it all. I pulled the overlay up now, through the market wall, out toward the gray keep, and there they were. The warden line. Steel blue armor, white light seams burning down their edges, moving. 6 of them in front, more behind, marching off the keep's approach straight toward the ring. Toward the loud number. Toward Tibbs and his slate on the counting stone, cord at the front of them, visor up. Coming for the glitch, coming for the symptom, never once for the man. Tibbs, I said low, put the slate down, walk. He didn't. He had the chalk out and my 64 fresh on the stone, and the warden line was close enough now that the white seams threw hard light across the near stalls. He looked at it. He looked at the slate, and he kept counting. 64, he said, loud, to the whole ring, crediting it where he always credits it. Milo, 64 times over. Copper hair, mustard smock, one unlucky porter with a chalk nub on a string, standing his ground in front of the thing that scorches whole regions, because he will not stop writing down what's true. That's the cost. Right there. That's the person I could lose. Not a number on my side of the wire, a man who won't look away. Every value I'd ever touched I could lose and re-earn with a scan and my own 2 hands. Not him. There's no cold rebuild for Tibbs. If the seams took the stall he stood on, no fresh scan brings him back. I'd spent the whole game learning I could rebuild anything, and here was the one thing on the board I couldn't, holding its ground on a slate in front of the fire because it wouldn't stop telling the truth about me. The wardens reached the ring's edge, and the seams burned white, and a full stall row went gray and dead under Cord's gauntlet as he quarantined the wrong thing, the empty thing, the loud symptom that had no cause he could touch. He never turned toward me. My hooks were clean, and clean reads as healthy, and healthy is invisible to him, but he was close to Tibbs now, close enough to feel the heat off the seams. They know there's a source now. They just can't see it. Wade found it before the wardens did. Not the trick. Not the how. Just the shape of it, the one thing 3 smarter men had missed, because they were all digging for a cartel, a glitch, a rigged scale, and never once for a kid. He'd trailed me into the ring. He'd watched Tibbs read my name over his ruined rare. And while Cord marched on a dead stall, Wade stood very still and looked at me. Really looked, for the first time, the way you look at a bag boy when you finally see there was a face there all along. His ice blue eyes went wide. "It's you," he said. "Quiet, just for me." His hunters were too far back to hear. Every flood, every count. The wall, the crown, His hand went to the dead stone on his sash. "It's been you, nobody, the whole time." I didn't deny it. There was nothing he could do with it. "Say it," I told him. "Go on, tell Mercer a starter cloth kid edits the world with a phone. Tell Cord, watch their faces." His mouth opened and shut. Because he had it, and he had nothing. No trick to hold up, no scale to show, no glitch to point at. Just a truth nobody sane would believe, coming from the guild crown whose stones had turned to gravel this same morning. Say it out loud, and he's the madman who lost his fortune and cracked. He knew it. I watched him know it and go quiet and hate me more for it. And the glass in my hand chose that exact moment to flicker. I looked down. 2 more saved paths gone red. Then a third, while I watched, the offsets sliding under my thumb. The drift wasn't creeping anymore, it was running, whole blocks going wrong in the space of a breath. 7 paths bad now. Then 8, then 9, red climbing the list faster than I could read it. The update wasn't coming, it was on the doorstep. 1 exhale out. The seam already closing over the whole toolbox I'd spent this entire game building, hook by hook, rung by rung. Every value I held, every stack. The 64 on Tibbs's slate. All of it sitting on offsets the patch was about to move out from under me. I had one breath to reach the wire underneath before the wire itself changed shape. I looked at the phone, at the red climbing the list, at the 1 clean path still open toward root, and I ran for it. Then the patch hits. The world blinked, not the sky. Everything. For 1 white breath the whole ring stuttered, stalls, cobbles, the warden line, all of it flickering like a held frame let go. Then it settled, and it was the same market, and it was not the same market at all. Under the skin, everything had moved. My phone knew first. The saved paths didn't just go red now, they went blank. Whole rows of my toolbox emptied out. The offsets I'd spent the entire game earning pointing at nothing, at moved memory, at doors that used to open and were bricked over now. 11 paths. Then nothing. The update had shut the map and dealt a new one. I did the only honest thing left. I scanned a stack I still had my eyes on. The X64 field 2 stalls down. I'd hooked it clean an hour ago, watched it pay double 64 times over on Tibbs's slate. I put my thumb on the glass and scanned its output the way I scan anything. Read the value, wait for it to change, re-scan on the shift. A porter dropped a hide onto the pile. The count ticked. I re-scanned on the tick. The number that came back read base, 1. Not X64, 1. The hook was gone. Not broken, gone. Its address moved out from under it. My rule left writing to a block that didn't exist anymore. I checked the next stack. Base. The next. Base. The patch had reached under every clean hook I owned and slid the floor sideways. Everything I'd built read back towards 0 on the glass. Candidate lists collapsing to nothing. 3 years of saved work turned to junk offsets in a single white breath. 64 to 1. In front of me on the screen, the whole game emptying out. I should have felt it land like a blade. I didn't have time. I ran my thumb down the dead list, path after path gone dark, and near the bottom 1 line did not go dark. 1 saved path still resolved. It resolved clean. I stopped in the middle of the ring with the wardens closing and read it twice to be sure. A 3-year-old pointer, one of the oldest I had, and it pointed at a live address that answered on the first scan. No drift, no red, the value sitting exactly where my old notes said it would sit. Everything else on the phone had moved. This one hadn't budged a single block. I knew that address. I'd written it down 3 years ago and never once dared touch it. It was the warden's own routine. The black box. The thing that hunts me. And there was the joke the patch had played without knowing it was funny. The update moves what the system doesn't trust. It leaves alone what it does. The warden's detection routine is the one thing in this whole world the system trusts absolutely, so the patch never touched it. Never would. It's the fixed point everything else is measured against. Every hook I'd earned was gone. Every stack read base. My toolbox was scattered blocks the patch had shuffled into the dark. Everything's gone. Except the one thing that hunts me. I stared at that clean line on the glass and the plan arrived whole, the way they do when there's only one left. Hook the black box, not a field. Not a payout. The one routine the patch left standing, the warden's own, and turn it. If I couldn't rebuild 64 hooks before the seam finished closing, I didn't need to. I needed one. The right one. Down the ring, the seams told me I was out of time to think about it. Cord's line broke formation, not toward me, toward Tibbs. 6 wardens in front, more behind, steel blue armor humming, and they angled straight for the counting stone, where an unlucky porter stood with a chalk nub on a string, and my name still fresh on his slate. They weren't hunting the source. They still couldn't see the source. They were doing what hunters do when the quarry won't show. They were reaching for the one thing the quarry keeps coming back to. Squeeze the witness. Make the man in the dark step into the light to save him. Milo. Tibbs saw them coming and didn't move his feet. He moved his chalk. They're on me. I see them. That was the whole plan, said out loud in the time it takes to say it. Now, I had to show it. I dropped to a crouch behind the counting stone, phone flat, and pulled up the clean path. Thumb on glass. The address resolved, the same one that had held through the patch, steady as a nail. I read it and it read back a routine, not a value, a block of the game's own code, the part that scans the world for hands like mine. It ran on a clock. Every few seconds it woke, swept the field for anything that smelled wrong, and marked what to purge. I watched it fire once on my glass. A sweep went out. The number of flagged tiles ticked up by 1, a desynced stall near Tibbs, the loud dead thing from before, and the routine handed that one to the wardens to burn. Fire, flag, hand off. Fire, flag, hand off. I watched it do it twice more and counted the beats between. The address held every time. Rock steady. The one thing in the world that hadn't moved, because the world would sooner doubt its own sky than doubt this. Cord walked to the front of his line with his visor up, pale slate eyes fixed on the dead stall, certain, so certain, marching on the symptom his own black box had handed him. He was 10 paces from Tibbs. I had the routine's address. I had its clock. I had one clean path and one breath left. To hook it, I had to open it. And to open it, I had to read what it had been doing for 3 years, read the black box's own log, the record of everything it had ever flagged and pulled. To reach it, I had to know why I was here. I injected the read, and the black box opened its history to me, line by line, on the cracked glass. 3 years of flags. Every corruption it had ever caught, tagged and purged, a graveyard of memory touchers scrolled past under my thumb, hands like mine, found and burned, region by region, the warden's whole grim harvest laid out in a list. And at the very top of the list, the oldest entry. The first flag. 3 years old to the day. It didn't have a purge stamp. Every other line closed the same way, flagged, contained, purged, done. This one flagged and never closed. The black box had found a thing it couldn't classify, a shape that didn't match any corruption it knew, and it did what it always does, it moved to purge. And it couldn't. The routine tried and the value wouldn't burn. It wasn't a glitch in a tile. It was a whole reader, standing outside the game, reaching in. So, the black box did the only thing left in its own rules. If it can't purge a corruption, it contains it. It pulled the thing it couldn't classify off the outside and sealed it inside the walls, where the walls could watch it. The entry had a name on it. Mine. That's what pulled a hacker into the game, not a curse. Not a door. The warden's own routine, 3 years ago, flagging the one reader it couldn't burn and filing him inside the system to contain the corruption it couldn't purge. Same logic as everything else on this list. No mystery under it, just a rule doing exactly what it was built to do, to a case it was never built for. I looked up. Cord had stopped. 8 paces from Tibbs. The certainty on his hard face had cracked. Just a hairline, just a flicker behind the pale eyes. A man who hunts corruption catching the first cold whiff that the thing he's been chasing has been inside his own house the whole time. He didn't understand it yet. He wouldn't let himself. But something in the set of his shoulders went wrong. Some warden's instinct reading the air, and his gauntlet paused above the dead stall it had come to burn. He felt it. He didn't know it, not yet. I looked back at the glass, at the open black box, at the routine 3 men had called untouchable and the system called the truth. The routine that purges everyone was 1 hook away. I had it open. Now I closed my rule around it. Locate, done, the address that held through the patch. Inspect, done, the clock, the sweep, the log with my name 3 years deep. Now, inject. My thumb moved on the glass and I wrote the rule into the black box, the same way I'd written a rule into a loot table 100 times, except this was the routine that decides what's real for the whole world, wardens included. The rule was small, 2 lines. When you sweep and find my hand, call it healthy. When you validate a drop, validate it twice. Then verify on the next fire. That's the whole trade. A hook isn't a hook until you watch the output change on the next tick. The clock came around. The black box woke and swept. Cord's gauntlet was already moving. The purge came down toward the dead stall by Tibbs, a full warden strike, the white seams flaring, the kind that turns a stall row gray, and gone. It came down. And it stopped, mid-swing. The seams burning white and the arm frozen in the air, because the routine that tells the wardens what to burn had just been told, by its own code, that there was nothing here to burn. The sweep ran my rule. It found the flagged tiles, checked them against its truth, and its truth now answered in my handwriting. Healthy. Every warden in the line went still at once, gauntlets dropping, the purge order dying in the wire between the black box and their armor. The police of the whole world stood down because the thing that commands them had just read out my code and obeyed it. The strike hung over Tibbs's head, frozen, and did not fall. That was the halt. This was the crossing. Validate a drop twice. The black box is the thing every scale, every board, every warden trusts to say what's true, and I just told it to count every one of my drops as true, and then true again. It didn't touch a field, it didn't grant a thing. It reached out across the whole world at once and doubled the only number that was ever mine, the compounding stack I'd earned rung by rung, because now the system's own truth said each one counted twice. 64. Then, on the glass, the counter rolled. Tibbs saw it on his slate before he saw the frozen wardens. His chalk stopped. His warm hazel eyes went to the stone where the running total lived, the one he'd carried on the same slate since he wrote my first one, in a green field a lifetime ago, and he watched it climb, 64, and past it, the number he'd never had room to write turning over. 100, Tibbs said. Quiet, at first, like he didn't believe his own chalk. Then he found his voice and he called it to the whole ring, the way he's called every number I ever earned, crediting it where he always credits it. 100, past it, 128, Milo, 128 times over. The unluckiest roll in the world. The porter who'd never once had the drop go his way, reading out the number that crosses 100 with a frozen warden strike hanging over his head, and not one thing in the world able to touch him. Cord stood in the middle of his stopped line, gauntlet dead at his side, and looked at the man he'd come to burn, and could not move a single warden to do it. His black box hummed my rule. His certainty ran my code. Whatever he is, Tibbs said, softer now, to Cord, to the wardens, to the whole ring gone silent, the black box can't see him. Now they understand what they lost. The recognition came off them all at once, in silence, the way the biggest things always land. Cord first. He turned, finally, after a whole game of never once looking at the man, and his pale slate eyes found me crouched behind the counting stone, with a cracked phone in a bright cyan case, and everything he'd built his life on came apart behind his face without a sound. Not a glitch, not a corruption in a tile. A boy. The thing his routine had failed to purge 3 years ago and filed inside the walls to contain, standing in starter cloth in his own ring, holding the black box in the palm of one hand. His instrument of certainty, the thing that had told him for 3 years the world was healthy, it wasn't his anymore, it reported to me. He read that in the frozen arm of every warden he owned, and he had no rule left for it. Off in his counting house across the market, I didn't have to see Mercer to know it landed on him too. His crown board had already cratered, now the last thing propping his whole scarcity machine, the belief that somewhere there was a cartel, an army, a rival empire worth his fear, died. His brass ledger key opened locks on prices that no longer meant anything. The monopoly he'd priced in decades read out its real worth on his own boards, the value of every gate he'd ever walled sliding to the floor. To zero, not a rival. Not a ring. One nobody in starter cloth with a phone, and a scarcity machine worth nothing the moment the world had enough of everything. 3 men had spent the whole game hunting a shape that would let them keep believing they mattered, a cartel, a fraud, a corruption. The shape was a kid they'd all walked past. They saw it now, all of them, in the same silent breath, and none of them said a word, because there was nothing left to say that the frozen wardens and the rolled-over counter weren't already saying for them. Cord's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The hardest, stillest man in the world, and the certainty that was his whole spine, was just gone. One face still had to fall in public. Wade was still standing where he'd cornered me, close enough to have watched all of it, and he was the only one the crash reached in a language the whole market could hear. Because Wade's worth was never a hook or a ledger. It was a birth roll. A 1% drop rate stamped on him at the start, worn as jewelry, priced by the same market now going quiet all around us. And in a world where the black box had just called every common drop true and doubled, where the fields I'd flooded all game had finally caught up with the patch, his rare was rare no more. A high buyer at the near stall lifted one of Wade's signature stones, the kind that had built his name, the kind that hung on his crimson sash, and weighed it on Bex's own pan out of old habit. The pan didn't tip. The needle sat flat. The board behind her, the one that had priced that stone in the hundreds a week ago, ticked once under the flood and settled at the number a common drop is worth. Scrap. His rare Wade scrap. common as the dirt in every field I'd ever doubled. Wade looked at the pan, and the flat needle, and the number on the board, and then at the market. The same faces that had crowned him for a role he did nothing to earn, and watched them do the cruelest thing a market can do to a prince. They didn't jeer. They didn't gasp. They turned back to their business. A stone worth scrap isn't worth looking at, and neither, it turns out, is the man who was only ever the stone. His ice blue eyes found me one last time. He had it, the whole truth, the one nobody, the phone, all of it, and he had nothing to do with it. No trick to hold up, no scale, no glitch, just a flat needle and a market that had already moved on. He closed his mouth. He didn't say it. He'd have been the madman who lost his fortune and cracked, and he knew it, and he turned and walked into a crowd that no longer parted for him. Around us, the ring let its breath out. The frozen wardens stood down. Bex looked at her honest pan and its honest number. Tibbs pressed 128 onto the slate, hard, and set the chalk down for the first time all day. The scarcity that had squeezed this world for a decade was just gone, and everyone in the market felt the same thing at the same time, the loosening of a fist that had been closed so long they'd forgotten it was a fist. The world could finally breathe. The wardens are still lowering their arms when I walk out of the market. Nobody stops me. All game the trick was staying small, bag boy invisible, a nobody looks at twice. Now I walk down the middle of the ledger's main row with a cracked phone in my hand, and the steel blue line just parts. Their visors are up, their gauntlets hang open at their sides. The routine that used to tell them what to burn is running my handwriting, and they know it. They step back to let me through. Behind me, the price boards are resetting, all of them at once. The great chalk crown board that held one number for 10 years wipes itself and settles low, common low. A hide that cost a fortune this morning costs a coin by afternoon. Beck stands at her pan and lets it happen, loop down, watching honest numbers land where lie numbers used to sit. And the market starts to say my name, not all at once. It moves the way a fire moves through dry grass, one voice, then three, then the whole ring. Somebody who saw the wardens freeze says it to somebody who didn't. The porter who carried my bag says it to the hide buyer. Beck says it flat, over her pan, because rules make her log the source, and for once, she has one. Milo, the bag boy. The starter cloth. Nobody in the charcoal hoodie they all walked past for a month while their world came apart in their hands. A month they blamed a cartel, a smuggler, a rigged scale, and it was a kid with a phone. Now they all know it, and the name goes across the ledger and out the gates and into every field I ever flooded. Ring by ring, over every stall in the market, faint gold rings bloom in the air where a drop is landing and stack a hanging X100 above it, plain as a price tag, for anyone with eyes to see. The one question I kept shut the whole way, will the world find out who? It was never hidden from you. Only from them. Now it isn't hidden from anybody. The source has a name, and the name is small, and that's the part they can't get over. The shape of the thing that beat them was a boy they could have knocked down with one hand on day one and never did, because he wasn't worth the trouble. Wade is gone into the crowd. Mercer never came out of his counting house. Cord stands where his line broke and watches me go and does not follow. They wanted a monster. They got a name. A market can't hunt a name it already let win. I keep walking, out the main gate, past the wall Mercer sealed against me a lifetime ago. It's just an open gate now. Nobody mans it. The scarcity that made it worth manning is dead on the boards behind me. The whole world is breathing out, and I'm the reason, and my name is in every mouth in the market. But route cost me something to reach. The green is where I started, so the green is where I go. It's the meadow from the first morning, the dawn field where I came to with 3 years of decompiled code and a cracked phone, and no idea the people here bled. The light is low and gold and coming in sideways through the grass, the exact light of the very first one. That morning the light belonged to the world. This morning it feels like it belongs to me. I can edit the sky if I want to. I did it once, dawn tonight, the only time. I don't want to. I sit down in the wet grass and let the real dawn be a dawn. Tibbs finds me the way he always finds me. Copper red hair, mustard yellow smock gone gray at the hem, slate under his arm, chalk on a string. He doesn't say anything grand. He just lowers himself down beside me with a porter's grunt, sets the board across his knees, and looks out at the same light I'm looking at. Here's the thing about the cost. All this time I've had a knife I never used. One right and the whole coin of the world goes to nothing. Mercer, Wade, the ledger, every gate zeroed in a breath. I found it clean. I held it. I took my thumb off the glass. Loud brings the wardens, and the wardens march on the witness, and the witness is the man beside me. That's what I told myself every time, but that was never the whole of it. The whole of it is this. Somewhere back in the fields, when Grady showed me his 30-year pouch and told me the smart ones quit, there was a version of me that could have won faster. Colder. The version that treats the porter as a counter, a useful routine you keep because it's efficient and drop when it isn't. That Milo reaches root in half the time. He doesn't slow down to keep one man close. He doesn't refuse the loud win because a bystander might catch the blast. He wins clean and empty, and there's nobody in the grass beside him at the end of it, and he doesn't miss them, because he traded away the part of him that could. I had root and reach the whole back half of this. What it cost to hold it the way I held it, quiet, clean, never once cashing the loud button, was speed. Was months. Was every easy win I left on the table because the easy win had a man standing too close to it. What I would not spend was him. I think about Grady, back in the fields, dropping his 30-year pouch and standing up for the first time in 3 decades. I'm not the trick, I told him. The finding is. I meant the honest re-earn, the thing the update can't wipe. But it was truer than I knew when I said it. The finding isn't just how I read the world. It's the part of me that still bothers to. The part that looks at a porter counting my wins and sees a man, not a routine that banks numbers. Keep that and you can lose everything else and find it again from a cold scan. Trade it away, and the fastest win in the world leaves you sitting alone at the end of it, and you don't even miss the empty chair. You're quiet, Tibbs says. So are you. He turns the slate over in his hands. It's the same slate. 3 years of nothing but bad rolls on it before me, then a month of mine written over the top of everything until there was no room, and he wrote in the margins and over the margins. He rubs a thumb across the oldest mark, half buried under 100 newer ones. My first. Milo 1. He wrote it before he understood a thing, before there was code or a hook or a number that meant anything, because a man walked through a monster in front of him and somebody had to keep count. I never asked what it does, he says. The glass. I don't want to. I watched you do the impossible about 1,000 times and I decided a while ago I'd rather just, he shrugs, count it. Somebody should. You do a true thing, it should get written down by somebody who saw it. That's the cost, right there, sitting in the grass telling me it never needed to understand me to keep faith with me. The kid who wrote my first one is still the kid who writes them. I didn't cold rebuild him. I couldn't have. Everything else I lost this month I re-earned from a fresh scan. The fields, the stacks, the whole toolbox went dark in the patch and I found it all again the honest way. Him I could not have refound. There's no scan for a man who watched your first win and chose to follow instead of flee. You get one. You either keep him or you don't. I kept him. Hand me the board a second, I say. He doesn't at first, he holds on to it, protective, the way he's held it all game. Then he understands what I'm asking and he grins, this tired copper-haired grin, and he sets the chalk in my hand instead. One last count, he says. He turns the slate to catch the low gold light so I can see the whole of it. 3 years of his own bad luck. First, faded almost to nothing at the very edges, the scratch marks of a man who counted losses because counting was all he had. Then, a lifetime up from the bottom, my first one, pressed careful, a witness not yet sure what he was witnessing. Then, it climbs. 2. He wrote the first double in a green field with a little X2 beside it because he didn't have the word for what he'd seen. 4. Over the top of the 2, when the scrap chest paid 4 times what it held. 8. The day the board ran out of sticks, written straight across all the older marks because there was no room left and no way he was going to stop. 16. Low and careful, after he learned the same thing I learned, that fast is loud. 32. Called across the whole ring while Wade watched his crown crater under it. 1 clean stroke off with a shaking thumb when a field went stale and died, then remarked it harder, pressing the chalk into the empty space. 64, over the top of everything, kept counting with a warden line burning white at his shoulder and refusing to set the slate down and walk. And at the crown of it all, biggest, dug deep enough to crack the chalk. 128. The whole arc on one slate, from X1 to X28, every field banked, every rung its own honest find and inspect and hook and verify, every doubling written down by the unluckiest man in the world in the order it was earned. It doesn't fit on the board, it never fit. He wrote it anyway. You did that, he says. He's not looking at the slate, he's looking at me. All of it, every mark on here is yours. He taps the chalk against the top, against my first one, held the count. He takes the chalk back from me, gentle, and under the 128 in the last sliver of clean slate at the very bottom, he writes one more thing. Not a number, my name. Just my name, at the foot of the whole climbing tower of it, like a signature on a thing that was finished. In my hand, the phone hums. 3%. The cracked screen dim in the gold light, the bright cyan case scuffed gray at the corners. Still warm. Still on. Still holding root over the whole breathing world at 3% of a charge, in a meadow, in the quiet humming the way it's hummed since the first morning. Nobody in the world can touch the number on that slate. Not the wardens, not the ledger, not a patch, not the anti-cheat itself. The one man who could tell you exactly how big it is can't read a line of the code that made it, and he's the only one I'd have wanted to count it. The dawn comes all the way up. Tibbs sets the slate flat in the grass between us, full, and we don't say anything for a while, and the phone hums, and that's enough. Here's how it settles. Everyone in this world farms the same rate, 1%. It's stamped on them at the start and it doesn't move. A birth roll, a lie. The market priced in decades. The whole reason a Wade gets a crown and a Grady gets a 30-year pouch and a Porter gets nothing but the counting. 1 in 100. That's the game. Every drop I touch pays 100. Not granted. Not a gift the world handed me. Found, one honest scan at a time, one routine at a time, doubled and doubled and doubled up. A ladder I climbed rung by rung with a thumb on cracked glass, until the number crossed 100 on a slate in a market that had spent the whole stretch of it swearing it was impossible. And the thing that polices this whole world, the one eye that's supposed to catch exactly what I am, reads my hand and calls it healthy. It looks straight at me and files me under nothing to burn. The game finally can't see why. 1% for all of them. 100 times over, for me. And the one machine built to notice the difference reports to the boy in starter cloth sitting in the grass, holding a phone at 3% next to the only man who ever bothered to keep count. The light is his now,